What happens when years of humiliation, cruelty, and betrayal collide with one woman's quiet strength and her billionaire husband's unwavering support? This is a story of revenge, redemption, and reclaiming your power. You're not wearing that to the rehearsal dinner, are you? My mom's voice sliced through the already tense air like a blade. I was standing in the guest room mirror, tugging gently at the hem of the only decent dress I had left in my suitcase, and it was ruined. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where you're from and which city you're watching our videos from. And after watching the whole video, don't forget to tell us what you would do in this situation. Be honest. Tell me in the comments below. We read every comment. Let's begin. All my clothes had holes in them. Precise, deliberate slashes, just big enough to be unwearable, just cruel enough to make me question my sanity. The moment I lifted the lid of my luggage that morning, I knew it wasn't an accident. The tears were too clean, too intentional. Now, she stood behind me, arms folded, the same smug tilt to her chin she wore when I was 8. And she told me, "You'll never be as pretty as your cousin Charlotte." "This," she said, gesturing toward the shredded fabric dangling from my hands, "actually suits you better than what you usually wear." Makes a statement. Desperate, honest. I turned slowly. My voice was low, but steady. "Why would you do this?" My mom didn't blink. "You always make everything about you, Hannah. It's your brother's weekend. Maybe it's time you accepted your place." My Aunt Carol cackled from the doorway, wine glass in hand at 11 in the morning. "She's right, sweetie. Honestly, maybe with a few holes in your dress, some desperate man might finally take pity on you. Might even find a date, huh?" They laughed like I wasn't even in the room. They didn't know. No one in that house, not my brother, Brandon, not my dad, not the cousins or even the bride-to-be, knew the one thing I'd kept hidden for over a year. I was already married, and not just married, secretly married to a billionaire who chose to stay out of the spotlight by my choice. I wanted to protect our peace. I didn't want my toxic family leeching off him the way they leeched off each other. But that decision came with a price. They still saw me as the failure, the invisible one, the burden, the plain daughter who had settled into a life of mediocrity, as my mom once phrased it. I hadn't told them about Nathaniel for a reason. But today, I wasn't sure I could keep it in anymore. Because he was coming. Not because I asked him to. Not because I cried on the phone, but because when I told him my mom slashed my clothes and mocked me to my face, he simply said, "Send me the address." That was 4 hours ago. Now, I sat on the edge of my twin bed in the dusty upstairs guest room, the same room they made me sleep in as a kid whenever relatives visited, wearing a t-shirt I found at the bottom of my suitcase and jeans with holes I didn't remember buying. The rehearsal dinner was in 3 hours. The house was chaos. Hair dryers blasting. Bridesmaids yelling. My brother laughing too loudly downstairs, trying too hard to show off for his fiancée's family. None of them noticed I hadn't come down since the incident. None of them noticed I'd gone silent. None of them knew I was about to walk through that front door. When the doorbell rang, my mother shouted from the kitchen without looking up, "Hannah, get the door. You're not doing anything useful anyway." I walked down slowly, deliberately, and then I opened it. There he stood, 6 feet 2 inches, broad-shouldered, wearing a tailored charcoal suit and a jawline sharp enough to slice egos in half. His brown eyes scanned me first, noting my torn jeans, the faded t-shirt, the raw tension in my jaw, then drifted inside the house. His gaze cooled. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly enough that only I could hear. I nodded once, swallowed hard. "You came?" He leaned forward and kissed my cheek. "Of course I came." Then he stepped inside. My aunt was the first to spot him. She dropped her glass on the floor. The sound of shattering crystal broke the hum of conversation like a gunshot. My mother turned, ready to scold until she saw who had just entered her house, and her face went pale. Nathaniel offered his hand, calm and commanding. Nathaniel Ward, Hannah's husband. The room stilled. The room froze. My mom blinked, mouth parting, but no words came. My brother stood mid-step at the stairs, staring like he was trying to process whether this was a prank. My dad, who never looked up from his newspaper, lowered it an inch and stared. I watched it all in silence. Every smirk, every cruel joke, every "you'll die alone," whispered behind my back, it all died in that moment, right there on their faces. Nathaniel didn't stop there. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a tiny velvet box, handed it to me like it was nothing. I opened it slowly. Inside was a replacement dress, a tag from a designer my mom used to say was for real women, not people like you. "I know what they did," he said, still facing my mother. "I'll be taking Hannah shopping later, but for night, I thought you might like this one." Silence. You could hear the air conditioning hum. Then softly he added, "I don't tolerate people hurting my wife. Not with words, not with scissors." And just like that, he wrapped an arm around my waist, kissed the side of my head, and said, "Come on, babe. Let's get ready. We've got a wedding to ruin." The silence behind us was delicious, but the story was just getting started because Nathaniel had one more plan, and it involved tomorrow at the wedding, where he'd make sure no one in my family, no one, would ever look at me the same again. The sun had already started to set when we arrived at the rehearsal dinner venue. It was a fancy waterfront restaurant my family rented out just to impress the bride's wealthy parents. Every table had champagne glasses already poured. Every seat had gold-trimmed place cards, and every person inside already had an opinion about me. Except this time, they weren't laughing. Nathaniel didn't let go of my hand once. Heads turned the moment we walked in. Conversations dropped off mid-sentence. I caught glimpses of widened eyes, the subtle nudges between relatives who had never once asked how I was doing over the last 2 years. My cousin Charlotte's jaw was practically on her plate. My brother's fiancé blinked at us like we'd walked in wearing Halloween costumes. My brother Brandon was standing by the head table. When he saw us, his face tightened. I could tell he didn't recognize Nathaniel at first. Not until one of the groomsmen leaned in and whispered something. Then his expression changed fast. "Is that?" I heard someone mutter behind us. Nathaniel pulled out a chair for me quietly, casually, then sat beside me like he owned the place. My mom hadn't said a word since the front door earlier. She walked in 5 minutes after us, red in the face and moving like someone who had just had the rug pulled out from under her. She sat across the room with Aunt Carol and didn't even look in our direction. It was awkward, but it was glorious. Just when things were beginning to settle, the microphone screeched. Brandon stood at the head of the room, grinning nervously. "All right, everyone. Let's get this started. First of all, thank you all for being here. Tomorrow's going to be a big day, but tonight's for laughter, for love, and for family." I saw his eyes flick to me for just a second. His smile twitched. "And since we're all together," he continued, "why not start with a little story about my amazing sister Hannah?" Nathaniel shifted in his seat. Brandon raised his champagne glass. "Hannah, the girl who once tripped over her own shoelace at my middle school graduation and took down the cake table. You remember that, right?" A few awkward chuckles around the room. I didn't say a word. Brandon grinned wider. "Don't worry, sis. We're not expecting you to make a scene this time. Though, I gotta say, the outfit's bold." The room rippled with uneasy laughter. Nathaniel stood calmly, confidently. The room went dead quiet. "Actually," he said, voice even, "if anyone owes someone a toast, it's me." Brandon blinked. Nathaniel continued, "To Hannah, who stood strong when others mocked her, who held her head high when her own family tried to humiliate her, and who, despite everything, has more class in one ruined dress than some people have in their entire overpriced suit." Aunt Carol choked on her drink. Nathaniel raised his glass to my wife and to knowing your worth, even when the people closest to you forget it. He clinked his glass against mine. The silence was louder than the toast. And then Brandon muttered, "Wait, wife." Someone gasped. My mother dropped her fork. Nathaniel glanced around the room and spoke again. Quieter this time. "Yes, I'm Hannah's husband. I wanted to meet her family before tomorrow, but it seems I already have." He sat down like nothing happened. My brother stood there frozen. His fiancée tugged at his sleeve, whispering something urgent. My mom looked like she'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. And me? I just smiled and took a sip of my champagne because they still had no idea what was coming tomorrow. Not yet, but soon. Very soon.